National Public Radio, in association with Independent Radio Drama Productions, presents one of the cases of Sherlock Holmes, with Edward Petherbridge as Sherlock Holmes and David Peart as Dr. John H. Watson. This is episode 1 of A Scandal in Bohemia. There was a phenomenon on London's newsstands in 1891. It was called the Strand magazine. Britain had never before seen a publication like it, offering photographs on almost every page. It was loaded with adventure stories, inside scoops on the lives of the rich and notorious, and interviews with famous people. More than 300,000 copies were sold in the first month the Strand was on the stands, an unprecedented event in British magazine publishing. The Strand was unabashedly populist in outlook. Its editors believed that a new literary art should be encouraged. Instead of the serial novel, which was then popular, the Strand would present a series of short stories, each complete, but utilizing a continuing cast of characters. It was to this new, innovative, and immensely popular magazine that a young writer named Arthur Conan Doyle sent a humorous story about a phonograph. When it was accepted, he decided to offer the magazine a series of 6 short stories featuring a character he had already introduced in 2 novels. The editors agreed, and in 2 weeks' time, Conan Doyle wrote 2 Sherlock Holmes short stories. The first was A Scandal in Bohemia. The instant this story appeared in the July number of the Strand, Holmes blazed into popularity. The Strand editors, knowing a winner when they saw one, asked Conan Doyle to write more than the 6 Holmes adventures. He refused. He had already plotted a historical novel and was anxious to begin it. But the Strand editors kept pestering him. Finally, Conan Doyle agreed, but set a price per story so high that he was certain the magazine would refuse to pay it. The editors immediately agreed to Conan Doyle's terms, and thus were written the short stories that would be later gathered into the anthology known as The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Here is the short story that began it all, as we hear Edward Petherbridge as Sherlock Holmes and David Peart as Dr. John H. Watson in episode 1 of A Scandal in Bohemia.
To Sherlock Holmes, she was always the woman. I have seldom heard him mention her under any other name. In his eyes, she eclipses and predominates the whole of her sex. It was not that he felt any emotion akin to love for Irene Adler. All emotions, and that one particularly, were abhorrent to his cold, precise, but admirably balanced mind. He was the most perfect reasoning and observing machine that the world has ever seen. But as a lover, he would have placed himself in a false position. He never spoke of the softer passions, save with a jibe and a sneer. They were admirable things for the observer, excellent for drawing the veil from men's motives and actions. But for the trained reasoner to admit such intrusions into his own delicate and finely adjusted temperament was to introduce a distracting factor, which might throw a doubt upon all his mental results. Grit in a sensitive instrument or a crack in one of his own high-power lenses would not be more disturbing than a strong emotion in a nature such as his. And yet, there was but one woman to him, and that woman was the late Irene Adler. I had seen little of Holmes lately. My marriage had drifted us away from each other. My own complete happiness was sufficient to absorb all my attention, while Holmes, who loathed every form of society with his whole Bohemian soul, remained in our lodgings in Baker Street, buried among his old books, and alternating from week to week between cocaine and ambition, the drowsiness of the drug, and the fierce energy of his own keen nature. He was still, as ever, deeply attracted by the study of crime, and occupied his extraordinary powers in clearing up those mysteries which had been abandoned as hopeless by the official police. From time to time I heard some vague account of his doings. His summons to Odessa in the case of the Trepoff murder, of his clearing up the singular tragedy of the Atkinson brothers in Trincomalee, and finally of the mission which he had accomplished so delicately for the reigning family of Holland. Beyond these signs of his activity, which I merely shared with all the readers of the daily press, I knew little of my former friend and companion. One night, it was on the 20th of March, 1888, I was returning from a journey to a patient, when my way led me through Baker Street. As I passed the well-remembered door, which must always be associated in my mind with the dark incidents of the Study in Scarlet, I was seized with a keen desire to see Holmes again.
There has been a murder done, and the murderer was a man. A Study in Scarlet, eh? Why shouldn't we use a little art jargon? There's the scarlet thread of murder running through the colorless skein of life.
The secretary, Mr. Joseph Stangerson, has been murdered.
Let me introduce you to Mr. Jefferson Hope, the murderer of Enoch Drebber.
If there's a place for a chief of police, I reckon you are the man for it.
See, the fire of vengeance has burnt out his heart. I knew of their guilt, though, and I determined that I should be judge, jury, and executioner all rolled into one. You'd have done the same if you had any manhood, if you'd have been in my place.
His rooms were brilliantly lit, and even as I looked up, I saw his tall, spare figure pass twice in a dark silhouette against the blind. He was pacing the room, swiftly, eagerly, with his head sunk upon his chest and his hands clasped behind him. He was at work again. He had risen out of his drug-created dreams and was hot upon the scent of some new problem. I rang the bell.
Watson.
I just happened to be passing and thought I'd...
A cigar?
Oh, well,
Wedlock suits you. I think, Watson, that you put on 7.5 pounds since I last saw you.
7?
Indeed, I would have thought a little more. Just a trifle more, I fancy, Watson. And in practice again, I observed. You did not tell me that you intended to go into harness.
Then how do you know?
I see it. I deduce it. How do I know that you have been getting yourself very wet lately, and that you have a most clumsy and careless servant girl?
My dear Holmes, this is too much. You would certainly have been burned had you lived a few centuries ago. It is true that I had a country walk on Thursday and came home in a dreadful mess. But as I have changed my clothes, I can't imagine how you deduced it. As to Mary Jane, she is incorrigible, and my wife has given her notice. But there again, I fail to see how you work it out.
It is simplicity itself. My eyes tell me that on the inside of your left shoe, just where the firelight strikes it, the leather is scored by 6 almost parallel cuts. Obviously, they have been caused by someone who has very carelessly scraped round the edges of the sole in order to remove crusted mud from it. Hence, you see my double deduction that you had been out in vile weather, and that you had a particularly malignant boot-slitting specimen of the London slavey. As to your practice, if a gentleman walks into my room smelling of iodoform, with a black mark of nitrate of silver upon his right forefinger, and a bulge on the right side of his top hat to show where he has secreted his stethoscope, I must be dull indeed if I do not pronounce him to be an active member of the medical profession.
I am always baffled until you explain your process. And yet I believe that my eyes are as good as yours.
Quite so. You see that you do not observe. The distinction is clear. For example, you have frequently seen the steps which lead up from the hall to this room.
Frequently?
How often?
Oh, well, some hundreds of times.
Then how many are there?
How many? I don't know.
Quite so. You have not observed. And yet you have seen. That is just my point. Now, I know that there are 17 steps because I have both seen and observed. By the way, since you are interested in these little problems, and since you are good enough to chronicle 1 or 2 of my trifling experiences, you may be interested in this. It came by the last post. Read it aloud.
There will call upon you tonight at 7:45 a gentleman who desires to consult you upon a matter of the very deepest moment. Your recent services to one of the royal houses of Europe have shown that you are one who may be trusted with matters which are of an importance which can hardly be exaggerated. This account of you we have from all quarters received. Be in your chamber, then, at that hour, and do not take it amiss if your visitor wear a mask. This is indeed a mystery. What do you imagine it means?
I have no data yet. It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts. But the note itself, what do you deduce from that?
The man who wrote it was presumably well-to-do. Such paper could not be bought under ½ a crown a packet. It is peculiarly strong and stiff.
Peculiar. That is the very word. It is not an English paper at all. Hold it up to the light.
Let me see. There's a large E with a small g and a P and a large G with a small T woven into the texture of the paper.
What do you make of that?
The name of the maker, no doubt, or his monogram, rather.
Not at all. The G with the small T stands for Gesellschaft, which is the German for company. It is a customary contraction like our co. P, of course, stands for papier. Now for the EG. Let us glance at our continental gazetteer. Eglonitz. Here we are. Egria. It is a German-speaking country in Bohemia, not far from Carlsbad. Remarkable as being the scene of the death of Wallenstein, and for its numerous glass factories and paper mills. Boy, what do you make of that?
The paper was made in Bohemia.
Precisely, and the man who wrote the note is a German. Do you note the peculiar construction of the sentence? This account of you we have from all quarters received. A Frenchman or a Russian could not have written that. It is the German who is so uncourteous to his verbs. This German, who writes upon Bohemian paper and prefers wearing a mask to showing his face. Different result, my lad. A pair of horses by the sound. Yes, a nice little carriage and a pair of beauties. 150 guineas apiece. There's money in this case, Watson, if there is nothing else.
I think I had better go, Holmes.
Doctor, stay where you are. I am lost without my bottle. And this promises to be interesting. It would be a bit easy.
But your client?
Never mind him. I may want your help, and so may he. Here he comes. Sit down in that armchair, Doctor, and give us your best attention. Come in.
A man entered who could hardly have been less than 6 feet 6 inches in height, with the chest and limbs of a Hercules. His dress was rich, with a richness which would, in England, be looked upon as akin to bad taste. Heavy bands of astrakhan were slashed across the sleeves and the fronts of his double-breasted coat, while the deep blue cloak which was thrown over his shoulders was lined with flame-colored silk and secured at the neck with a brooch of flaming beryl. Boots, which extended halfway up his calves and which were trimmed at the tops with a rich brown fur, completed the impression of barbaric opulence. He carried a broad-brimmed hat in his hand, while he wore, across the upper part of his face, a black vizard mask. From the lower part of his face, he appeared to be a man of strong character, with a thick, hanging lip and a long, straight chin suggestive of resolution pushed to the point of obstinacy.
You have my note.
Pray, take a seat. This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson, who is occasionally good enough to help me in my cases. Whom have I the honor to address?
You may address me as the Count von Krapp, a Bohemian nobleman. I understand that this gentleman, your friend, is a man of honor and discretion, whom I may trust with a matter of the most extreme importance. If not, I should much prefer to communicate with you alone.
Holmes, I think I'd better...
It is both or none. You may say before this gentleman anything you may say to me.
But then, I must begin by binding you both to absolute secrecy for 2 years. At the end of that time, the matter will be of no importance. At present, it is not too much to say that it is of such weight it may have an influence upon European history.
I promise.
And I.
You will excuse this mask. The august person who employs me wishes his agent to be unknown to you. And I may confess at once that the title by which I have just called to myself is not exactly my own.
I was aware of it.
The circumstances are of great delicacy, and every precaution has to be taken to quench what might grow to be an immense scandal and seriously compromise one of the reigning families of Europe. To speak plainly, the matter implicates the great house of Ormstein, hereditary kings of Bohemia.
I was also aware of that. If Your Majesty would condescend to state your case, I should be better able to advise you.
I am the king. Why should I attempt to conceal it?
Why, indeed. You are Wilhelm Gottfried Sigismund von Ormstein, Grand Duke of Cassel-Felstein and hereditary king of Bohemia.
But you can understand. You can understand that I am not accustomed to doing business in my own person. Yet the matter was so delicate that I could not confide it to an agent without putting myself in his power. I have come incognito from Prague for the purpose of consulting you.
Then pray consult.
Well, the facts are briefly these. Some 5 years ago, during a lengthy visit to Warsaw, I made the acquaintance of the well-known adventuress, Irene Adler. The name is no doubt familiar to you.
Kindly look her up in my index, Doctor.
Of course, Holmes. Adler. This must be it. Good Lord, Holmes has got some strange fish in there.
Find her, Watson?
Yes, here she is.
Let me see. Born in New Jersey in the year 1858. Contralto. La Scala. Prima donna Imperial Opera of Warsaw. Yes. Retired from operatic stage. Living in London. Quite so. Your Majesty, as I understand, became entangled with this young person, wrote her some compromising letters, and is now desirous of getting those letters back.
Precisely so. But
was that a secret marriage?
None.
No legal papers or certificates?
None.
Then I fail to follow Your Majesty. If this young person should produce her letters for blackmailing or other purposes, how is she to prove their authenticity?
There is the writing.
Forgery.
My private note paper.
Stolen.
My own seal.
Imitated.
My photograph.
Bought.
We were both in the photograph.
Oh, dear. That is very bad. Your Majesty has indeed committed an indiscretion.
I was mad. Insane.
You have compromised yourself seriously.
I was only Crown Prince then. I was young. I am but 30 now.
It must be recovered.
We have tried and failed.
Your Majesty must pay. It must be bought.
She will not sell.
Stolen, then?
5 attempts have been made. Twice burglars in my pay ransacked her house. Once we diverted her luggage when she traveled. Twice she has been waylaid. There has been no result.
No sign of it?
Absolutely none.
You have quite a pretty problem.
But a very serious one to me.
Very, indeed. And what does she propose to do with the photograph?
To ruin me.
But how?
I'm about to be married.
So I have heard.
To Claudel Lotham von Saxe-Meiningen, second daughter of the King of Scandinavia. You may know the strict principles of that family. She is herself the very soul of delicacy. A shadow of doubt as to my conduct would bring the matter to an end.
And Irene Adler?
Threatens to send them the photograph. And she will do it. I know that she will do it. You do not know her. But she has a soul of steel. She has the face of the most beautiful of women, and the mind of the most resolute of men. Rather than I should marry another woman, there are no lengths to which she would not go. None.
You are sure that she has not sent it yet?
I am sure.
And why?
because she has said that she would send it on the day when the betrothal was publicly proclaimed. And that will be next Monday.
Oh, we have 3 days yet. That is very fortunate, as I have 1 or 2 matters of importance to look into just at the moment. Your Majesty will, of course, stay in London for the present.
Certainly. You will find me at the Langham under the name of Count von Krapp.
And then I shall let you know how we progress.
Pray do so. I shall be all anxiety.
Then, as to money?
You have carte blanche.
Absolutely.
I tell you that I would give one of the provinces of my kingdom to have that photograph.
And for present expenses?
There are £300 in gold and 700 in notes.
And Mademoiselle's address?
Bryony Lodge, Serpentine Avenue, St. John's Wood.
And one other question. Was the photograph in a case?
It was.
Then, good night.
Mr. Holmes, I am in your debt. Good night.
And good night, Watson.
Eh? Oh, yes. I must be getting on. My wife, you know.
If you'll be good enough to call tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock, I should be glad to chat this little matter over with you.
Precisely, I was at Baker Street, but Holmes had not yet returned. The landlady informed me that he'd left the house shortly after 8 o'clock in the morning. I sat down beside the fire, with the intention of awaiting him, however long he might be. I was already deeply interested in his inquiry, for, though it was surrounded by none of the grim and strange features which were associated with the study in scarlet, which I have already recorded, still the nature of the case and the exalted station of his client gave it a character of its own. Indeed, apart from the nature of the investigation which my friend had on hand, there was something in his masterly grasp of the situation and his keen, incisive reasoning which made it a pleasure to me to study his system of work and to follow the quick, subtle methods by which he disentangled the most inextricable mysteries. So accustomed was I to his invariable success that the very possibility of his failing had ceased to enter into my head. I waited some time. Suddenly, the door burst open. I say, you can't just come in. Oh, of course.
Oh, I won't give you a moment, Watson. Just need to get out of these stinking vestments. There. Holmes is himself again.
What is it?
It's quite too funny. I'm sure you could never guess how I employed my morning or what I ended by doing.
I can't imagine. I suppose that you've been watching the habits and perhaps the house of Miss Elaine Adler.
Quite so. But the sequel was rather unusual. I left the house a little after 8 o'clock this morning in the character of a groom out of work. There is a wonderful sympathy and Freemasonry among horsey men. Be one of them, and you will know all there is to know. I soon found Bryony Lodge. It is a bijou villa with a garden at the back, but built right up to the road. 2 stories, chob-block to the door, large sitting room on the right side, well furnished, with long windows almost to the floor, and those preposterous English window fasteners which a child could open. It is as secure as a sieve. I walked round it and examined it closely from every point of view. I then lounged down the street and found, as I expected, that there was a mews running down one wall of the garden. I helped a couple of stable lads rub down their horses and received in exchange a glass of gin, 2 fills of shag tobacco, and as much information as I could desire about Miss Adler.
And?
She has turned all the men's heads. She is the daintiest thing under a bonnet on this planet. So say the Serpentine Mews to a man. But she only has one male visitor. He is dark, handsome, and dashing. One Mr. Godfrey Norton of the Inner Temple, a lawyer. That sounded ominous. What was the relation between them? Was she his client, his friend, or his mistress? If his client, she had probably transferred the photograph to his keeping. On this issue depended whether I should continue my work at Briny Lodge or turn my attention to the gentleman's chambers in the Temple. It was a delicate point. I was still balancing the matter in my mind when a hansom cab drove up to Briny Lodge.
Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson match wits with the woman on the next and concluding episode of A Scandal in Bohemia. Edward Petherbridge was Sherlock Holmes, with David Peart as Dr. John H. Watson and John Elms as the King of Bohemia. The story was adapted for radio by Richard Shannon, with original music performed by Robert Gibbs and Michiku Ueno. I'm Steve Zakar. Support for this program is provided by National Public Radio member stations and the NPR Arts and Performance Fund. This is NPR National Public Radio.